For the hobby, 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 for the hobby. Welcome to the For the Hobby podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hagedorn, and this is episode 2. First and foremost, I want to thank everyone who listened to episode 1 with Josh and Chris. I've gotten a lot of great feedback and encouraging words from a bunch of hobbyists, so we appreciate the support. And now on to episode 2. On this episode, I talked to a hobby veteran who's worked in the industry for over 27 years. I met him 2 years ago at the NFL Combine and have since been able to pick his brain about cards, past, present, and future. And it's been an absolute pleasure. He worked at Beckett Media for many years in a bunch of different capacities, which we'll get into, and is now the Director of Football Product Development at Panini. So without further ado, here's episode 2 with my guest, Rob Springs. Rob, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be on.
So you and I have connected and talked a lot about cards and the history of cards. And can you talk a little bit about your history growing up as a kid, where you grew up, and some of your favorite athletes and some of your favorite moments when it came to sports?
Yeah, originally from born in San Antonio, but moved to Houston when I was like 2 years old. So grew up a fan of Houston sports. So at that time, you're talking Nolan Ryan, Earl Campbell, Warren Moon. I told you earlier, even Jim Kelly, because the USFL got so big when the Oilers weren't that good in the early to mid 80s. So just mainly focused on those guys, and then oddly enough, got into collecting more from seeing Star Wars: Return of the Jedi. Didn't really collect as a small kid, but around that 82 or 83, I got really deep into those cards, and from there I kind of branched into the 84 top set, collecting Marino or chasing Marino and Elway and those guys, and then kind of worked year after year, just kind of chasing, Moon in 85 and, like Rice in 86 and so on and so forth.
Did you play sports growing up, or did you just watch sports more so?
No, I played, YMCA football and Little League baseball and all that kind of stuff, and played football through senior year of high school, and then decided that I'd just rather do other things in college. So just ended my career at the high school level, where a lot of us do.
Understandable. Well, and I played sports as a kid. I loved baseball, basketball, football, which is why I eventually gravitated towards the cards. So at what point did you know you would either work in the hobby or work in sports? Did you pursue that, or how did that journey kind of come together?
I was kind of off and on collector and started going to card shows and all that kind of stuff. But really in '89, not so much where other people may say, oh, the Griffey Upper Deck rookie, and blew it up because I was more a football guy. But really with Score and Pro Set, when you could get the rookies the year they were released, right? That was the first year that the market flipped, and you could start digging into packs and really chase the guys that were so hot on the field that were rookies. That's what kind of turned it for me. And then I started doing card shows, and I was in college at that time, and so I ended up working at a card store as well for a couple of years before I was able to get and work at Beckett Publications, because they were hiring, and a gentleman that ran a card store that I always went to and frequented at the time said, hey, they're hiring, and I know some of the guys there, and I can pass your resume along. I was like, great. So that was kind of my first real job coming out of college as well. So been very fortunate to be in the industry my entire life, but that's where I kind of got hooked in to the actual industry. I was working for Beckett in '93.
Okay, so 1993, that was before, it was kind of after the bubble of cards broke a little bit, but then into the 90s, football, I feel like, got really hot again. You had Barry Sanders, Jerry Rice, Brett Favre. You had a lot of guys that had kind of invigorated the hobby into the 90s. So in your time at Beckett, can you talk about your connection with Dr. James Beckett, who started Beckett Media and the Price Guide, and then how you integrated in, settled into your first job, and kind of how you were able to kickstart your career at that point?
Yeah, when I started there, I was just an information analyst, which we just kind of gathered market report type things, which at the time came from people filling out price guides and changes, dealers doing that for us and sending it back into us, and dealing at B2B. eBay was not a thing yet. And it was weird because there were I want to say there were 26, 27 analysts overall just in that department at Beckett. And so it was just total opposite of what, where they are now today, where you would really have to go and dig for information, and then you would meet with Jim every time before you would put out a price guide, and he would say, ask questions like, well, why'd you make that change, or why'd you want to move this player up, and he would kind of quiz you, which is the way Jim has always been. It's just so weird how many how big that entire department was and how different things were then versus today.
Yeah, and we met up at the hobby dinner that Jim Beckett has annually. It was my first time, and you've been there a couple times, correct? So can you talk about your connection with Jim Beckett and him as a person? I got to know him. He's very intuitive, he's very perceptive, and he's very curious. And I really like that about him. He's somebody who loves cards and is a very curious person. So he's going to challenge you and question you, but also have really great conversation. Can you talk about your connection with him over the years?
Yeah, what's great about Jim is he's always been somebody that cared so much about the business and the people that worked for him. So he would go out of his way to talk to you about things. And again, we were in the analytical department, which of course was nearest and dearest to him. So he would obviously interact with us a lot more than maybe somebody else from other parts of the department. But yeah, you just sit down and like I said, even those weekly meetings, where he'd pick your brain, but he valued your input and your opinion. Which, a guy fresh out of college, making, I think at the time, $17,000 or whatever it was, just to hear him look at me, me coming in, knowing who he was, and then, truly wanting my opinion on why I thought something was like this or why it should be was just amazing. And that's kind of the way it continued and the way he is today. He still cares about a lot of us that have worked there, and a lot of us that started at Beckett have ended up in other parts of the industry, whether it's working at Upper Deck or at Leaf or Topps or Panini. Obviously, lots of us are at Panini. A lot of us have got our roots at Beckett and then just kind of sprouted and went to other places.
And you can tell just from the people he had at the hobby dinner, yourself included, that he has a lot of respect for you guys. He gave you guys the floor to talk and ask a lot of questions about Panini football and the history and kind of the evolution and how now where you're going to the future. So that connection was really cool to see firsthand. And you're right, he treats you guys like a family. It was really cool to see that. So can you talk about your history more then, how it evolved? You were an analyst, and then I know you said you were the head of pricing at one point. So can you just talk about some of the things, how that evolved, and then you left for a little bit and came back, and you've had a really rich history at Beckett. Can you talk just briefly about that history?
Yeah, it's kind of where you start an information analyst in that department, then you kind of go to assistant price guide editor and then a price guide editor. So I kind of worked my way up, actually working on basketball is where I started there. And did that and was there my first run for 7 years, mainly being the price guide editor for basketball, but also helping out a little bit on the football magazine up through 2001 when I went to Donruss Playoff to be the football brand manager, and went on to be the director of the entire product development department for Donruss Playoff through about 2005, and then went out on my own and did some selling of cards through eBay and the Beckett Marketplace store. And went back to Beckett to work on the price guides again in 2010, and then ended up going to Panini in 2015. So,
okay, and you've been with Panini since 2015 to now?
Yes.
Okay, so in your time with Beckett, head of pricing, talking through basketball, football, the 90s were incredible. I love the 90s. You had Michael Jordan, you had Shaq coming in 93, so you saw all that Shaq, kind of his rise in his career, and Grant Hill and Jason Kidd. And then football, you had, again, Favre, Elway, Barry Sanders, Dan Marino, who was a big part of the hobby. And then on the baseball side, you had Griffey, Cal Ripken, Frank Thomas, Derek Jeter. Can you talk about some of your favorite athletes and some of your favorite moments and sets and things back in the 90s that made it so fruitful and so fun for you?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of different things, right? The introduction of the super premium stuff in 93, whether it was Finest by Topps or SP. By Upper Deck, or even stuff like like the 93 Fleer Ultra set was one that I still remember vividly, because that was, I know you had Stadium Club, which had really rich photography and still does, honestly, but in 91, but the 93 Ultra set just was still one of my favorite football and baseball sets, and basketball as well. I mean, it was the same design across the three. Topps Chrome, we kind of lived through that explosion. In '96, it was a retail-only product. It had not done well in baseball, and it had not really done well in football either. But in basketball, it wasn't doing well, and then we just kept kind of giving it time, and because we knew the distribution was really tough, being retail only, and obviously that draft class with Kobe and Iverson and Abdur-Rahim and just so many guys in that 96, 97 class, that started to take off, and it just exploded between that and the refractors both, and then that kind of spawned, because at the time we were also very fortunate because card companies would come in and talk to us about a lot of ideas, and so like in Topps, in that case, they were actually thinking about killing the Chrome brand, but that basketball helped to revive the whole thing, and then obviously Chrome went on to just be a huge thing, which honestly led to items like Prism and stuff that we do now, just to give a true nod and an honest nod to what they did. So stuff like that, or when guys from Upper Deck, Tim Uray and Jamie Kiss at the time came in to talk to us about, let's develop this thing. We want to do this Jordan only set. So, I mean, what do you guys think should be in that? And for us to be able to contribute and say, well, this would be kind of cool. Or even with SPX, where it was mainly focused around the hologram cards, right? So the first couple of years, they did it that way, and then they asked us the same question, is this something that we should keep doing, the hologram cards? And that's what SPX is. And we're like, well, no, it's not. SPX can be whatever you guys want it to be. It can be it's just another high-end brand that you guys have. And then it kind of developed into something else, and then into SP Authentic and things like that. So so that was kind of cool to be a part of as well. It was just it was a different time where being at Beckett was almost more glamorous than being at Fleer or Topps or Upper Deck at the time, which was, again, today, that's just, no, you got to be kidding, but it was. So it was cool. I mean, those guys would fly in like once or twice a year just to talk to us about, here's what we got coming out, and ask our opinions on stuff. So so it was very cool to kind of be a part of those things. I mean, obviously, I don't take credit for it or anything like that, but to be, to know that I had a little piece in it, and obviously other guys had far more developmental and the way they made the actual programs, and how the master collection came about and things like that. But it was cool knowing that we at least got asked our opinion at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's crazy to look back and see how great Topps Chrome is. Yeah. And to your point, that draft class of Kobe and Iverson and Ray Allen and Steve Nash, and looking back, it's, to me, Marcus Camby, it's one of the best draft classes to me of all time. You had 03 with LeBron and Wade and Bosh and Melo, and then you had 2011, which I think with Kyrie and Kawhi and Klay Thompson. I mean, it's a pretty incredible draft class too, but pretty crazy to think they were maybe going to kill it, and then that revived it, and the evolution kind of took place to now, or to your point, you have Prism, and Prism is, to me, one of the hottest things in the hobby right now. Right. And so from that, amazing stories, thank you for sharing. From that, now, your time at Panini, can you talk about when you got there and how it's evolved? I mean, Panini, in my opinion, is now the king of the hobby. You have the license for football. We're here at the NFL Combine. You have the license for basketball. And Prism has really taken off with Luka and Zion, and, of course, on the football side with Lamar and Mahomes and some good rookies this year. So can you talk about your time at Panini and how it's evolved to where you are now, and just give the listeners a little bit of a background on what you do there?
Yeah, I mean, on the football end, when I came, not back, but I guess it's kind of back since I was there when it was Donruss playoff, we had just gotten the full exclusive. So it was kind of trying to figure out, where you're going from 18 sets, because the league still wanted the full complement of 35, 36 type sets. So for us, it was kind of wading our way through the water of figuring out which sets were going to work, because we had to try some new stuff or bring back some old stuff, and kind of figure out what may stick. And so that was the first couple of years, in 16 and 17, we're really trying to figure that out. But then things started kind of to click all at once. We kind of found a good groove with the releases that we had. The market really took off, whereas everything in basketball is always done well overseas with short parallels and short inserts. That was never the case in football. But then kind of in the 2016 Prism with the Dak and Zeke, we started to see some prices that escalated that weren't obviously on par with basketball, but were a lot bigger than what we'd seen in football before. And then that just kind of kept growing. And so we kept doing and tweaking and, okay, let's make our silver and prism, one per box and see if that helps. And that value exploded. And, okay, we've seen how downtown and kabooms have worked in basketball. Let's bring them to football now and see if that works. Now that started to work, whereas a Tom Brady Tough Insert may have sold for $20, now they were selling them for, $200, $300, even to this year's Prism Color Blast, which had Brady selling for like $1,500. And so, between everything that's happening, whether it's case breaking or investors or, a lot of kids coming in, we've just gotten the right mix and have had some great classes. 16 was obviously great out of the gate and on paper. 17 wasn't so great, but now is full of potentially maybe the richest, deepest draft class we've seen in a while when you start with Mahomes and Watson. And even Trubisky, who still has, plenty of time to your Camaras, all your running backs, so 17 and then built into 18, which had a lot of hype coming in. And so even like 19, all of our products are still over cost, doing great. Because the product development team, builds them so well. I mean, and not to slight our entire company. Obviously, we have a lot of good people doing a lot of good things, but the product development team as a whole, not just for football, has got a lot of really strong guys, a lot of guys with a lot of history, having worked in the industry for a long time for the most part, as well as a combination with some new guys that are really having a case breaking and watching things like that. And so it's a nice mix. And it just helps us to develop a different spread of products, I think, that appeal to a lot of different people.
Yeah, and I got to give you guys credit. You've done a great job pulling it all together. You made a good point earlier with back in the day with Fleer and Upper Deck and Tops, and they would ask you at Beckett what was cool. And the tricky part about working at a brand, even at Panini now, is there's times you're in a little bit of a bubble. You pay attention to what's going on in the market, but you're still in an office designing cards that you hope people will fall in love with. That is the one thing I will say about meeting you and some of the guys from Panini at the Beckett Hobby Dinner is you guys all love this stuff, man. And it's why we're starting this podcast, is to give the audience and give people a look into some of these really cool things where you can kind of peek behind the curtain. And so this is a lot of fun to hear. I give you guys a lot of credit for taking and iterating so much. This industry, as you know, over 20 plus years, 30 years even, has really evolved, and it is banking on the card designs, the actual health of the hobby, the consumer, but also the draft classes. And you mentioned that. You had Dak and Zeke, and then these rich draft classes now. I just got to give you guys a lot of credit. You guys have done a lot of great stuff and evolved it well and listened to the market. And I think that's something that's really important. And I can tell that stems the love of the hobby from you guys. So a lot of props to you there. So with that said, we're at the NFL Combine. You talked about past draft classes. Can you talk about this class? What's next with this class, some of the deals you've done, and kind of give people a look at what you're doing here at the Combine and how that works to get some of the rookie deals done, and then also how you connect with some of the players here at the Combine.
Yeah, I mean, this upcoming football class could be just crazy. It's it may be a combination of like the 17 class that was really deep and the 18 class where you had these 5 top-name quarterbacks. And so, yeah, when you start talking about even beyond like your Burrows and your Tuas with how well that Jordan Love is going up or Herbert has fired up and Eason, and there's so many good guys in this receiver class. It's just insane. I mean, you could have 12 wide receivers in the first couple rounds. Obviously the running backs aren't as strong, but Swift is still going the first round. Dobbins is probably a borderline 1 to 2, and then you still got guys like Jonathan Taylor or Vaughn or Dylan. I mean, there's a ton of guys. Cam Akers. I mean, there's a ton of guys. So, and then you put a guy like Chase Young or even Simmons, which they're going to be collected heavily. There's always a couple of guys that are really strongly collected. So if you throw all that together, I think this draft class is going to be pretty amazing to try to chase after and collect. So, but as far as putting stuff together, we generally do a lot of deals early on. Most of your guys that are known guys, we've already negotiated with and have done. And then when you get to the Combine is where you kind of, some of your bubble guys that may have been CLC only, which would be just our college products, they may emerge to go, okay, well, they've done, we've seen this kind of progress through the Combine and stuff, so now instead of a CLC only deal, they may go ahead and move into an NFL deal as well. or some guys just may pop onto the scene that you keep an eye on, and then you may do something with, depending on how the actual draft goes. So there's initial offers, and then stuff that comes post combine, and then right around the draft, post draft, and then lastly we usually pick up a handful of guys for contenders based on what's going on with the preseason. That's where we take a shot on someone like Taysom Hill a couple of years ago with the Packer. Time didn't seem to be that big a deal or whatever. Same thing with Kittle or with Mostert or some of those guys, which are also all in the 2017 class, by the way, like contenders. But so that's kind of how the kind of the ebb and flow that we go each year. So we got a pretty good idea. Most of the deals are done by the time we get here, but there's always guys that pop that we're able to move up and do future deals with as far as getting them an NFL product.
Yeah, that's amazing. As a diehard football fan, I recognize a lot of those guys' names, and their lives are about to change here as they get drafted. If you're not a football fan, you're listening to this and you don't know some of those names, as the season progresses, as the next couple of years progress, you're actually going to listen back and hear some of these guys that have risen up and might even see on the cover of a box or packs with Panini. And that's what I really like, is to see that evolution and the growth. We actually saw that with Kurt Warner back in the day, where he came out of nowhere and all of a sudden he took over the hobby in really 99, 2000. And so that's what I'm excited for, is as these guys emerge and evolve in their careers, and depending on what city they go to and how much hype and how well they play, we'll see that evolution to where there's some really cool cards. And you saw Mahomes didn't even play his rookie year, and then now he's probably the hottest in the hobby for football, coming off a Super Bowl. So that's amazing stuff. I mean, the hobby is very healthy right now. We've talked about that. We talked about that at the annual hobby dinner there with Beckett. Can you talk about the health of the hobby as a whole? We've seen a lot of new collectors come in. We've seen investors. We've seen breakers. We've seen a lot of the cards jump in value, but more than anything, I think we've seen a lot of really good people come back into the hobby or join the hobby, which has created a lot of love and energy and excitement in the hobby. So would love to hear your take on that and the state of the hobby at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I've really never seen anything like it for as long as it's sustained. I mean, I guess we're going on like probably about 3 solid years. And again, it's a combination of things. It's just your average collectors that we've always had. It's your guys that are coming back, whether they have heard about things, or you're making enough money now where you can collect a certain amount of autographs and things like that you maybe couldn't have in the past, and then you're ready to get back into it. Investors have been heavy. I mean, there's been a lot of talk, a lot of publicity on other sites and things like that about guys that are investing in this. That's why you need to get in this hobby and do this. So you got that. You obviously, breakers have been just a huge addition. It's still arguably one of the best ways to, if you just want to collect this team and that, and you still want to try to open some national treasures, but you certainly can't afford a box or whatever for reason. It still gives you entryway to collect that particular set, even if you can only afford yourself to buy, a Score or a Phoenix or Prism or whatever it may be. So it's just been, and people say we may be pricing out the kids and stuff like that. We say that, but we've had more kids over the last couple of nationals than I can remember. And I know we do kids breaks, and so we're going to see more of those type of things that go on at our booth. But I think a lot of people will tell you the same thing. If you get some honest feedback from the national, they've probably seen more kids. And by kids, I'm going to classify like 16-ish down, right? But more kids over the last couple of years than we've seen in a long time as well. So, I mean, Panini is obviously, by taking the lead and being the industry leader and having, the exclusives in both basketball and football, I certainly think we're at the forefront of developing this hobby to where it is now. But a lot of companies are releasing some good products. So, it's going well. I mean, our demand still far out exceeds our supply. Retail has just been going absolutely crazy over the past 6 to 8 months. Now, I know there's a lot of investing in that as well, right? Usually some guys used to go in and see Prism or whatever and just buy a pack or two or whatever, and now they're clearing off the shelf because of investment potential, and a lot of that has to do with Zion as well this year. But things are just really strong, and I think it's because so many collecting segments are hitting right now. It's just a perfect storm that's created, and we'll see. I mean, we've been talking about, well, let's see how long this lasts. Well, we've been talking about that now for about the past 18 months, and it hasn't slowed down. So again, we'll see how long it lasts, but we'll keep doing what we do and try to provide value the best we can. And again, it's a lot of collectors on our end that are putting together these sets. So we watch breaks all the time. We read message boards, read the blowout boards, read all the bad as well as the good, and as well as get feedback when we go to shows and things like that. So we try to do our homework and listen to people and make changes where we feel is appropriate. But and hopefully we'll just keep having the right mix of stuff out there.
For sure. And to your point with younger collectors, I will say that some of these young kids are hustling more than these adult collectors, and they're on Instagram and they're finding ways to create really great collections and kind of level up to get some of these really expensive cards. And they are predicting some of these players like Giannis and Luka, and then their collection triples in value over the last couple of years, and they're able to start kind of playing with the big boys, and that's something that I think the internet has had a level playing field. I think if kids do their homework and their research and they kind of gravitate towards cards they love or that they think are going to be hot and they project that, I think the hobby will remain healthy. And it's good to have some of these younger, hungrier collectors that push us older guys to kind of think a little differently, and people within the hobby to listen to them. And I just love the dynamic nature of collectors. You have so many people that collect just sets or just players or different brands, but also different sports. And so we talked a little bit earlier before we started recording about how everybody's collection is different. It's like they have their own fingerprint and their own ability to assemble a different collection. So I'm very curious where it goes, how long it lasts. But to your point, everything you said I agree with. It's super fun. And the thing I appreciate about our connection and you and I talking is you've always come off as very grateful and very knowledgeable in the hobby. But to us, it's more than cardboard. It's more than a hobby. And what are some of your favorite things about the hobby over all the years you've been in it?
Honestly, it's probably the people I've gotten to work with. Guys like Nick, who's my boss, who's the senior director of our entire product development group. Ironically, worked for me as my assistant brand manager at Donruss Playoff, right? But I've known him, now for 20 years. And, the other directors, Ben Eklar and David Porter, Ben Eklar was at Beckett already when I got there in 93, 94. He hadn't been there much longer, but, so I've known him for that long. And David Porter, we hired, who's our basketball director, we hired at Beckett, I think in probably 97, 98, something like that. And then I ended up hiring him to come at Donruss Playoff in 02, 03, something like that. So again, known these guys forever, or, brand managers like Tim Trout or Keith Hauer, known those guys forever. So, even guys at the companies, whether it's Grant Sandground at Upper Deck. When I started at Beckett, he was the guy I reported to, right? Because he was in charge of basketball at the time. So it's just so many connections that guys that I've known for so long and are very, and all of us have been very passionate about the hobby, whether we're pricing cards or making cards, it really doesn't matter. And that's what I think. I know where our guys come from, and I know how long that they've been at it, and there's just a big. It's like a locker room where we are. We have a lot of fun with what we do. I don't think, at the end of the day, I don't think any of us lose sight, and I try to tell my guys that. At the end of the day, you are making cards, and so there's a job, and there are inherent stuff that goes on with any job that you do, but at the end of the day, we're making trading cards, and that's awesome. And I'm grateful just because that's really all I've known. That's all I've been lucky enough to put food on my table and support my family through this my entire career. So that's why I'm so grateful, is I haven't had to go get a real job for the most part. I've been able to do this, or even when I wasn't working for one of the companies, I did my own thing and sold cards and made a living doing that for 4 to 5 years in between. So, I've got nothing to be not grateful for when it comes to this industry.
Sure. Well, you're a lot like me. Never grow up, right? That's the goal. So, well, you mentioned guys like Jim Kelly and Warren Moon at the beginning, guys that you collected when you were younger. Growing up, you admired them and saw them, and maybe that helped you get hooked into the hobby a little bit. And then you mentioned some of these draft classes, but do you have any favorite athletes now that you've either worked with or seen their cards or enjoyed? I know you have some current teams, but can you touch on some of the current players that you've enjoyed watching and some of your favorite athletes throughout all these years?
Yeah, a lot of the guys we get to know pretty intimate, doing the rookie photo shoot that we do every year. mainly because they're spending about 4 to 5 solid days with us, and so and for the most part, the kids are really good. I mean, you're obviously going to have some bad apples in every class, but like even a couple of years ago, Lamar Jackson, when I sat down doing autographs with him, one of the most respectful kids that I've ever sat with. Everything was yes sir, no sir. It just again, it's like I'm old, but I'm not that old. Even he said it's just that's just a respect thing. So guys like that, or even Patrick Mahomes the year before. I mean, Derrick Henry the year before. There's just there's a lot of good guys, and that's why it's easy to collect a lot of these guys as well, because not only are they good on the field, they're good people. Then that's been most of the interaction. You'll run across. I'm fortunate enough whenever we have the Super Bowl trips to go to the the Hall of Fame luncheon and stuff, and meet some of these Hall of Famers, because usually one or two guys will sit at the table with you. So that's very cool. This year we had Andre Reed, and last year we had like Warren Sapp and Derek Brooks at the table and stuff. So you get to meet some of those guys as well as some of their guys. So it's I don't know if I have a favorite player, just because now I see so many different players and things like that. But there's a lot of good guys, and that is why people also collect them, right? It's not just everything they do on the field, but they also keep their nose clean and are good people off the field. And even like when the guys came back after the basketball rookie photo shoot with Zion, scared to death that he just may be because he had already been built up to be everything, and he was one of what I understand one of the nicest, most down-to-earth kids that they had dealt with, and which is still mind-blowing when you got all that hype and everything coming around. You can easily get a big head, but he was very gracious and very great, did everything they asked, stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good kids.
I like Zion's humility. You can already tell he played LeBron for the first time the other night and was just humble talking about it and honored to play LeBron, and you can tell he's going to carry the torch really well. And I think that's something that's important for the hobby, is to take from Kobe and LeBron and Jordan, evolving into the Zions of the world, the Lukas of the world, and some of these players that I think will carry the torch into the future, which for guys like us who saw Michael and saw Kobe and saw Iverson and some of these marketable players in the 90s, and even LeBron, it was hard to see, will there be a next guy? And now that we've seen a guy like Zion and Luka, and they seem very humble and seem very gracious and open to the opportunity to be the face of the hobby or the face of the sport, is something that I think tells us we're in good hands. And they're going to be part of the culture of basketball and cards, and just like those players like a Saquon as well, and some of these guys that I think will carry the hobby into the future really well. So speaking of the future, everybody always wants to know what's going on behind the scenes and what's next to come. Do you have any fun tidbits to share, without maybe sharing too much about what's coming, but with this draft class, any new products, anything fun we can look out for maybe after the draft or into the 2020 season?
Like I said, we really got our releases pretty solid. We're going to remove Unparalleled and put in a brand called Mosaic, which basketball is also doing. And it's not quite what you're thinking of in the past with just the patterns. It's actually a full new Optichrome product. Other than that, we've taken our black program, which was direct-to-consumer only last year, and it was such a hit that we're going to do that as a normal, quote-unquote, normal release this year. Still have all the white ink autographs and things like that in the program. And we are going to put in, actually, dabble in Zenith as our direct-to-consumer program that's going to replace that. So it won't have Dufex, because the company that originally made Dufex back in the 90s, as cool as some of us think Dufex is, I'm included, that technology, I say they because I wasn't at Panini, they tried to replicate it in 2012 or 2013, and it just didn't quite look the same. So we're going to kind of try to reimagine Zenith a little bit, use some of the names from the past and kind of redevelop it, kind of like what we did with Black, with Panini Black, honestly. Just kind of reimagine that. We do have Chronicles coming out, which is it's actually still a 19 program. It won't be a 20 program, so it'll release between Flawless and Score. So that'll be kind of cool, because at first when Chronicles has done so well for the other sports, distributors approached us, and I was like, well, there's not really any brands left to do. But then we started to look at it and say, well, there's still Classics, which had a pretty decent following, even though we flipped it out. And then, you had the Gala which had the rookies numbered to 8, and that was kind of cool. And then basketball did Dynagon, and some things, and we started Gridiron Kings, which we hadn't used. So when we started kind of, we stopped doing silhouettes, and so we started kind of piecing everything together. We're like, oh, we can actually, we can put this together and make this program. And since we weren't doing honors in that slot, let's take the updated score and in this case Legacy and Luminance and put them on Chrome like we did before with the updated NFL photography. So that'll still be in there. So after we sat down on what we call whiteboard, which is where we kind of figure everything out, we kind of made that program work. So that'll be after Flawless, and then we kick off with Score, and then you'll see a lot of familiar things with Legacy and Luminance and Prestige will be retail only again, and Certified and Donruss and all those kind of things. So
very cool. Well, I'm excited. I know there's a lot of attention on basketball, but I'm a diehard football fan. I know you are as well. We're leading up to the draft. It's going to be an exciting draft class. Chiefs coming off a Super Bowl win. There's a lot of competitive teams. We're going to figure out where Tom Brady might end up. So there's a lot of great storylines coming in the NFL. So I'm excited. I am on a mission to get people more interested and excited about football. I have a lot of friends who are high-end basketball collectors, but they've dabbled with Todd Gurley or Mahomes and kind of seen the market rise there too. And of course, as Jim Beckett knows, I'm a big Brett Favre fan, so I'm always advocating for those 90s guys. There's a lot of beautiful inserts back there too. So I want to thank you for being one of the good guys in the industry. You've always had a lot of passion when we've connected. You've always had a lot of energy and a lot of knowledge, and I appreciate you sharing that with all of us. I will get you out on one last question, but I want to thank you for being on the podcast, episode 2. And I would just ask, what insight or advice do you have for either younger collectors or people that have gotten the hobby, or long-term collectors, just from your time in the hobby? What would you tell them, and what advice would you give them kind of going into the future?
Like I alluded to before, in football, if you include our CLC programs, we literally release like 39 programs. So there's something for everyone. So you can't always jump in on NT or Flawless or whatever it may be. Obviously some people can, and that's great. But, there's just, you can find cool cards in Score. You can find cool cards in, Prism at retail or whatever it may be, because you can still find some football retail Prism or Donruss Optic, for still reasonable prices. And especially still with football. Obviously, the basketball craze has gotten a little bit out of whack this year, but that's a Zion effect. But I think there's something out there for everybody. And even if you can't collect, if you only have to collect X today because you can't afford Y, hopefully eventually you'll be able to afford Y and then move on to Z or whatever else it may be. So there's something out there for everybody. Just stay within your budget. Look at breaks as a way to dabble in some high-end stuff if you can do that. And there's a way to enjoy the hobby where you don't feel like you have to overextend. And if you have the money to overextend, then by all means go right ahead. But there's still stuff for everybody at different levels between hobby and retail.
For sure. And I would just say, I always encourage people to collect what they love. It doesn't matter if you're digging around in the dollar box or you are extending a little bit to grab a card you never dreamt you could get, or getting into the breaks. You made a good point earlier where if you're into just a certain team, you can buy that team in a break and things like that. So I love the dynamic nature of the hobby right now. You can go into a card shop and go to a show and online and Instagram, and there's just a lot of ways you can share your love of the hobby, and this podcast is one of them. And so I appreciate you being on, and look forward to the future of Panini football and connecting again next time.
All right. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Perfect. For the hobby, 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 for the hobby.